Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Thursday morning, June the 3rd, to you. June the 3rd? Goodness gracious. August the 3rd, to you and yours. It's not baseball season, folks. It's football season. And you're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. It's good to be with you today. Just me today in the studio, here with you for the whole hour, but thanks so much for waking up with us here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio or the TuneIn Radio app or our own WTSM app. We quite like the app. We're pretty proud of what we put together there, so make sure you have the WTSM app on your phone. It gives you the latest episodes of this show and, of course, all the other fine programming that we have on ESPN Tallahassee. iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com, YouTube. There's a plethora of ways to get the podcast. You know those by now. You probably have yours by now. I want you to do us a favor. If you like the show, go in, rate, subscribe, give us a good review. Give us 5 stars. It makes no mistake. It helps our show out, and it helps you out. The fact that you don't have to go searching for a new episode is right there in your stream, right there ready to roll when you open up your app. You want to talk back to the show, radio@warchant.com. There's your email address, your comments, your questions, your concerns about the show, about the team, about anything that's on your mind, whatever you want to rant about. If you feel like it's worthy of it, it's email right there. Or if you like doing it through Twitter, @WakeUpWarChant is your Twitter handle. It's been crazy 48 hours. Football, thumping in the brain. Finally, of course, if you're not a premium member of warchant.com, why wouldn't you be right now? This is a great time to get some of our exclusive premium content. Jump on board with many of the cool features we've got. Ira Schafel right now on the front page of warchant.com has a 3-2-1 story. Those are always really good. Ryan Clark's got a story about Fisher challenging the freshmen to step up on the front page of warchant.com right now. You can get all this stuff, and you can get plenty of other free stuff as well. If you sign up for a year subscription and you use the promo code Knowles2017, NOLES, that's a capital N, by the way, 2017, you're going to get yourself 6 free months along with your year subscription. You're going to get a $25 gift card to Garnet and Gold. You're going to get yourself a stainless steel warchant.com tumbler, kind of like one of those Yeti ones. And then, of course, you're going to get yourself a warchant.com t-shirt. That's a lot of stuff for free if you just sign up for a year. So if you've been thinking about doing it, if you've been thinking, I think Florida State's going to be pretty good this season, I think it might be worth my while to get a membership, be inside, now's a great time to do it. Knowles 2017 is your promo code to do that. And then finally, of course, we're always brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, all there in the heart of College Town. Also on the front page of warchant.com right now, I'll toot my own horn. We got a couple of the freshmen from the first day of practice. Sights and sounds of the 2017 newcomers. There's some good footage here. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty pleased with how this video turned out. I tried my best to get as many people as we could, and I did want to share a couple of the observations I got with you here, and that's James Blackman and Bailey Hockman both look like they look the part. Blackman could maybe use a little bit more meat on his bones, but it's also just because he's so dang tall. That guy is you don't realize just how kind of imposing he is until you get up next to him and you realize, wow, yeah, he's got some height. Bailey Hockman, just since we've seen him in spring, looks a lot more like a college ball player. He really does. And I think a lot of that has to do with sometimes being an early enrollee and being more comfortable in what you've seen and what you've done, and being in that system just for a couple extra months. It's a really big deal. Of course, you see some of the guys that you knew you were going to see. You're going to see Cam Akers. You're going to see Josh Kando. Kando, and I know I mentioned this with Irie yesterday, but I think it's pretty cool to mention, was the guy that Brad Lawing was using to teach technique, to teach how to do things, to teach how to get things done. And when you're worrying about, are freshmen going to be ready to go for the season? You know they're talented, but sometimes it takes some guys some adjusting to that level or the way that guys practice, well, yeah, you feel pretty good about it when he's kind of the example, when he is kind of the E.G., if you will, to use a literary term, I guess you could say. Marvin Wilson, what I saw of him, boy, he looks just like a football player. He looks exactly how I knew. Seeing him in a recruiting camp 2 years ago to where he stepped on campus now and is in pads, he looks like he's a junior. Those guys, he has the size, he has the ability, he has the look. It was clear that it was his first day of practice, though. Odell clearly working on some form stuff with him, and that's actually in the video there, just him kind of working a little bit on, where your weight needs to be when you're in your stance. How do you get the most explosive out of your stance? And let me say this, if he can get more explosive, that's a big deal. I'm anxious to see what he can look like. I don't think he's a 4-year player. I think you might be fooling yourself if you think that he's going to stay for 4 years. But by year 3, when that rolls around, what type of player does Marvin Wilson look like? Because if he was that good in high school going against some of the best, I want to see what he looks like against college guys. And I want to see it sooner rather than later. Finally, I know Ira pointed it out in his 3-2-1 piece, and I'll say it and I'll echo it and I'll give you his observation for free because it was my observation as well. Tamorrion Terry's another guy who looks like he could have been a part of this team for quite some time. He's just so physically imposing. Again, he's raw, and we've talked about that with Michael Langston before. I don't know how much we're going to see him on the field this year. I don't really know when we're going to see a finished product with him, but if he becomes a finished product, if you can mold him into something special, if you can mold him into something that realizes the potential that he has, he can be a really good ball player, and he can be that big, tall, imposing threat that Florida State finally got one of those back in Auden Tate. They got a big guy who can go up and get the ball. If Florida State had another one of those guys while Auden Tate's still here, if Tamorrion Terry became a number 2 option to do that as a sophomore, look out. But again, that's maybe a little bit more down the road. Didn't get to see a ton of DJ Matthews, but what I did see, I know he was with the second team, I want to say, working with end arounds early on at the beginning of that drill. So lots of freshmen that were active, and you like to see that they were active, but you also like to see that they're in a position where they can learn and where they can grow. And a lot of these guys aren't expected to be there right away. Now, DJ Matthews is a guy who may make that case to be that number 3 wide receiver, and I think a lot of that's going to have to do with Keith Gavin, another guy that when you talk about big physical threats, if you can get him going, that could be another number 2 option to Auden Tate. Heck, he could even be the guy next year. Who knows? So many pieces, so many fresh new faces to see. We got you about a 3-minute video on warchant.com, all there in glorious 1080p, so make sure that you are checking that out. All right. A lot of stuff happened in the world of sports last night. Let's get you reacquainted with some of the stuff you may have missed, or you may have already been in bed counting some sheep. This, ladies and gentlemen, is While You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake me up! Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
All right, here we go. Major League Baseball last night. The Tigers, oh boy, it took a long time for them to finally get this rain-delayed game in, but they defeat the Yankees 2-0. The Blue Jays go to Chicago, and they take another one from the White Sox, and that's 5-1. Twins over the Padres 5-2, complete with a complete game from Mr. Santana. Outside of that, it's the Indians and the Red Sox who didn't play yesterday. Game was postponed due to rain. Orioles over the Royals in Camden Yards 6-0. Reds over the Pirates 5-2. Marlins 7-0 over the Nationals, including a couple really nifty plays to keep that shutout intact. Kristen Yelich made a great play in center, and at the end of the game, Giancarlo Stanton reaches over the fence to rob the Nats of a home run and actually end the game because it happened with 2 outs. It's almost like he's an athletic freak or something. Braves over the Dodgers 5-3 in Atlanta. Rangers beat the Mariners 5-1 in Arlington. 3-0. That's the Diamondbacks over the Chicago Cubs. 5-4. The Cardinals over the Milwaukee Brewers. And speaking of the Cardinals, guy you may have heard of got himself a win in the majors yesterday. Yes, that's Mr. Luke Weaver. going out, former Florida State pitcher. 6 1/3, gave up 5 hits, 2 earned runs. He walked 2, struck out 8, ERA of 3.77. For your second go-around this season, yeah, I'd say that's pretty good, kid. Well done. Rooting for that guy. He was always a great guy to cover here, by the way. 3-0. That's the Rays over the Astros in Houston. Mets beat the Rockies 10-5. 10 unanswered runs in that game. Angels over the Phillies 7-0, including a bomb to dead center from Mike Trout. If you haven't seen it, go in and look at it. And it's the Oakland Athletics defeating the San Francisco Giants in San Francisco 6-1 last night. When we come back, we got plenty to talk about today. Deondre Francois was on SportsCenter last night, so we'll bring you the highlights from that. Athlon brought out their anonymous quotes from ACC coaches about the other ACC teams. We'll talk about that. There's a lot to discuss here on the third day of fall camp. Stick around. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio. All right, welcome back. Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, and Township. No, there's no misunderstanding, Phil. We're here for another day of Florida State football. Day 3 of the college football season, technically, with Ryan Kelly here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio. And Athlon, actually. It's not every day that in 2017 you talk about one of the preseason magazines, but Athlon does a unique little feature every year that I always enjoy reading, and they put it online yesterday about off-the-record anonymous ACC coach quotes about the other teams in the league. And there was plenty to be said about Florida State, Louisville, Miami, and Clemson, so I thought it'd be fun to maybe read a couple of these, break down what's going on, and start with the Noles. And, quote, the first quote is pretty great. They're going to be really good. Gee, thanks. Thanks for the expert insight. You know, we're asking a football coach here, man. We're not asking a dude on the street. I could tell you they're going to be really good. At least I think they're going to be really good. Why are they? But they get better from there. Quote, getting Derwin James back from off the injury solidifies their defense. Their biggest limitation is at linebacker, but Matthew Thomas can be as good as there is in the country. I think that's exactly right. If you are looking for a problem on that defense, it's got to be the linebacking core, just in that whoever this coach is pointed it out and pointed it out well. Matthew Thomas can be as good as there is in the country. And I think you saw that get solved a little bit last season as it progressed, and you saw that with most of the team as the season progressed. That can turned into is as good as anyone in the country. When the buy-in happened, you saw him have phenomenal games at the end of that year. You saw him look really good against Florida. You saw him look really good against Michigan when he went out there and he laid it all on the field. If that's the guy you get from day one, if that's the guy that goes out there against Alabama and against Miami, and heck, even against ULM early on in the season, that linebacking core is going to be just fine. That's where it gets down to the nitty-gritty. This defense will be as good as that linebacking core lets it be. Those corners are going to be good. That front four is going to be great just because there's so much depth. Guys know if I'm not playing well, if I'm not great, I can be replaced. Linebacking core, Matthew Thomas, that's the guy. That's who's got to step it up. Quote, offensively, they're very average up front. That's being nice, I would say, in my opinion. Especially losing Rod Johnson early, which I know caught their staff by surprise. They're not as good on the offensive line as they were a few years ago, and you saw that with how many times Deondre Francois got hit last year. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. It's amazing to me just how much Florida State's weakness there is known. It's amazing that coaches are just kind of open about it, and that, listen, if we're going to exploit this, we got to win this game in the trenches. And I think this has to be bulletin board material for these guys, right? Because we've heard this since 2014. We've heard it a little bit before then. Of course, that 2013 line was really good, but 2014, Jameis doesn't have any time. 2015, Golson or McGuire is going to get killed back there. 2016, boy, look at how many times Deondre Francois has gotten hit. This has to be bulletin board material, right? You'd hope so, at the very least. This is a unit that I think we all know, as goes this unit, may go the offensive line, may go the offense, and may go the season. Quote at running back, people are going to see they've got a special guy in Cam Akers. Man, it's amazing the coach is already in on that guy. I understand everybody did their homework, everybody researched him, everybody scouted him. But for a coach to say right out of the gate, hey, we're kind of scared of the true freshman, that makes you feel good about it. And, of course, the things you've heard out of camp, Jacquez Patrick's still going to be the guy to start this season. At least it's most certainly looking that way. And I think you very well see him as the quote-unquote starter for the whole year. And I do think sometimes people underestimate what he does and what he brings to the table. But if Cam Akers can come on sooner rather than later, that's the good thing. But here's where this quote gets interesting to me. Quote, I think he's every bit as fast as Dalvin Cook, but he's probably a more fluid athlete. Cook had that acceleration, but I think Akers in the long run can do more things, catching the ball out of the backfield, and a more natural fit for that offense. I think he can be good right off the bat. Florida State has just kind of, if Akers becomes the guy that people think he can be, it's amazing for as much talk about Jimbo Fisher being the quarterback guy. And, of course, it's just a pro-style offense in general, so it's going to be a balanced attack. But think about the running backs since Jimbo Fisher took over in 2010. The starting running backs at Florida State have been Chris Thompson. It's been Devontae Freeman. It's been Dalvin Cook, Jacquez Patrick, and maybe Cam Akers as this season goes on, or maybe a couple years down the road. But I'll put that five up against just about any five of the last five starting running backs the program's had in the country. That's impressive. That's quite honestly a little boggling, the fact that Florida State's been able to do that consistently again and again and again. And what kind of blows my mind with it is look at the pro careers that a couple of these guys have had. Chris Thompson, a lot of us thought, yeah, he's a good college running back, and he might get a shot in the NFL. He's found himself a role in Washington. Devontae Freeman, we all know what's happened with him and the Falcons. Dalvin Cook, by all indications, doing very, very well in Vikings camp, and is more than likely making a better argument every single day for that number one spot. As much as we talk about Jimbo's quarterbacks, it's the running backs that at this level and at the next one have really had a big, big role and have really shown the star power. Miami, it's pretty much a consensus. Quote, they lost their quarterback, their best receiver, and a big-time tailback, but they're still probably the most talented team in the division. Quote, outside of quarterback, they bring back more experience than anybody in the division, so that will be key. They played a bunch of freshmen last year all over the field, so they've got some guys who can step in, and they're recruiting well. There's a consensus here, folks, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Miami because, to me, it's a pretty open and shut case, and we've talked about it before on this show, and you could flip on any radio show on the Atlantic coast or read any article, and you could get the same thing all over the East Coast. Yeah, Miami's probably the best team in the division, but A, they've never won it, and B, they're replacing their quarterback who was pretty good. It's as simple as that. If N'Kosi Perry turns out to be really good in his first year, there's no reason Miami shouldn't win the Coastal. And if Miami doesn't win the Coastal and he's good, I wonder how long that grace period is going to last for Mark Richt. I get it. He's the hometown kid. He's opened up recruiting windows in South Florida that Al Golden literally welded shut. And it didn't seem like Miami was going to be able to open those for quite some time. Mark Richt's gone there, and he's healed a lot of bridges very, very quickly from a recruiting standpoint. He's done a couple things that haven't been done at Miami in a while. They looked at times in that season like a competent football team on both sides of the ball. But you got to win before anybody takes you seriously. And I think Miami gets that. Mark Richt has to get that because that's kind of been his legacy, right? That's been the legacy that, how seriously can you take Mark Richt when you don't win the SEC East at Georgia a lot? That's what ended up eventually getting him chased out. I think Miami proves to him a second chance because if he can do it at Miami, who hasn't been able to do it since they joined the ACC, he gets a little bit of that credibility back. Divisional rival Clemson, quote, they'll steal your signals. People don't want to talk about it, but the teams that gave them fits were NC State and Pitt because they were huddled teams. I don't think that's a coincidence. It's not a very well-kept secret, but it didn't matter. They could have told us what was coming on every play, and they still would have whipped us. And I think that's a testament, of course. That was the best team in the country last year. I really don't think there's much doubt of it anymore. Beating Alabama in a title game is a big deal, and doing it with as much talent as Clemson had is a big deal. But I do think it's so funny, kind of the unwritten rules of football, and that, we don't talk about it, at least not on the record, that, hey, they're signal stealers. Hey, they do this. Hey, do that. There's such an unwritten rule that everybody does stuff like this, that if I have dirt on you, then you most certainly have dirt on me. And I am not saying it on the record because you will come right back out and say something right back at me. Quote, they're all right in the secondary, but they grab better than anyone else. It's funny because when I think about Clemson grabbing, I don't think about them in the secondary. I think about their wide receivers, and that's probably just because I root for an NFL team in the same division as Nuke Hopkins, who likes to tuggy-tug a little bit on the other folks. Finally, it's Louisville, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Lamar Jackson. Quote, it's kind of hard to project Louisville because they're a hodgepodge collection of people, and they go get 4 or 5 JUCO guys nobody knows. If that's not the most apt description of a Bobby Petrino team I've ever heard, please bring me a new one. If you've got one that beats that, fine. But that's Bobby Petrino in a nutshell, right, folks? Yeah, he just finds a couple dudes. It's basically the next level of Last Chance U. Guys who've had their problems. Come on in, boys. Let's play. We're mercenaries out there, gentlemen. Let's get this done. Louisville, however, just like Florida State's problems on the offensive line are well known, it's pretty easy to see that, Louisville's offensive line and their defense are both problems too. Quote, tempo really hurt them on defense, end quote. Yeah, you look no further than the game that ends up ruining their season. Houston. They go on the road. They play a team that's got a lot of tempo, a lot of speed. Todd Grantham ends up getting pretty much the boot because that game happened and then that season fell apart. You can't be losing to Kentucky with a Heisman Trophy winner. You can't be losing to LSU without Leonard Fournette. Not just losing, but getting embarrassed by them. Yeah, that defense, woof. Quote, they've had their issues up front. This, of course, talking about the offensive side of the ball. And people finally figured out how you had to play them. Recipe-wise, if you sit back and play zone and you just worry about rush lanes, that's playing right into their hands. People will play them differently out of the gates this year, and it's going to put a lot of stress on their offensive line to protect them better. I am interested to see how, not necessarily how teams are going to play it, because I think whoever this coach is, that's exactly right. People are going to go right after Lamar Jackson. They're going to say, we don't care how mobile he is, he can't move in a half second. If we can get through these guys very, very weakly, if that offensive line doesn't get better, we can eat this guy's lunch, regardless of how quick he is, regardless of the athlete he is, because if their receivers don't have times to get open, who cares about running lanes? Who cares about where he can take off? Because if we've plugged all those places, he doesn't have anywhere to throw. He's a sitting duck. So I'm less interested in how defenses are going to attack Louisville than how Louisville's going to respond to that. And the easy answer is there. Just have a better offensive line. We all know, especially with Florida State over the last couple of years, sometimes it's easier said than done. But overall, it's fascinating. Louisville fascinates me more than, because I think we all know that Clemson's in a rebuilding year. Louisville's about to break in a new defensive coordinator. They've still got the Heisman Trophy winner. They're picked third in that division, but they smacked Florida State last year. And I think we know, and Bobby Petrino even said it, they spent a lot of time in the offseason preparing for FSU. FSU looked completely overwhelmed in that game. They took Clemson to the wire last year, and many a Louisville fan could probably argue, and I wouldn't give them much of a fight, that it was maybe some home cooking that cost them that game. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, but here's what I am going to say. Louisville is a complete wild card in this division. I don't think they're going to win the thing, but here's the thing. I think either Florida State or Clemson, whoever ends up winning or losing that game, it could come down to how does that team fare against Louisville? Because they have the potential with that superstar quarterback. I'm not sure if it'll happen to Florida State at home, especially with as ticked off as that Florida State team's going to be, and as much as they're going to want to play Louisville, and I know Florida State's going to downplay it. It's going to be, well, our opponent's the same, and we keep our preparation the same. Bullcrap. That team embarrassed you last year. I think everybody kind of knows in the back of your mind those guys want revenge. So I don't know if it'll happen to Florida State, especially at Florida State, but Clemson goes to Louisville this year. And what happens if, knock on wood, Florida State goes to Clemson and loses? What happens if, God forbid, they go up there and they drop that game? Well, then that Louisville game that happens way earlier in the season, that may just mean everything. That may just mean the whole shebang. So even though I don't exactly think they're a playoff contender, and I don't exactly think they're a team that can win the ACC, I think they can have a significant voice in if somebody, namely Florida State or Clemson, gets to it. We got more after this, talking a little bit about Deondre Francois appearing on SportsCenter last night here on Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in Warchant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on Warchant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Welcome back. Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio. Of course, brought to you as always by our friends from For the Table, Madison Social, Central Township, all there in the heart of College Town. And speaking of which, it's a Wednesday show, which means later tonight you can maybe get yourself in on Winstein Wednesday. Of course, where you can get yourself a full liter of beer over at Township for half price. Of course, the beer changes every single week. And this week, well, we've got Proof Lager. So local beer, local lager, if that's your fancy. Head on over to Township. Have yourself some fun tonight. That being said, last night you may have missed something, especially if you were a live listener to the show. Scott Van Pelt's probably one of the best personalities on ESPN. But if you have a schedule like most of us do and you wake up early, well, you don't get a chance to see his midnight show. And there just so happened to be a certain quarterback by the name of Deondre Francois on his show yesterday. Of course, this is the first time that he's spoken to any media, as far as I know, since camp has opened. He got a chance to talk with SVP, and we actually stayed up a little bit, recorded that for you, and, well, we just wanted to dissect a couple things. I didn't think we'd do this segment for a second time on the second day, but here we are, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for Duly Quoted.
Quote mode.
We have ways of making talk.
You talking to me?
Okay, I'll stop.
End quote mode.
All right, so like I said, Deondre Francois on Midnight Sports Center with Scott Van Pelt. By the way, hate to just kind of make this a love fest, but SVP did do a really good job with this interview, talking with Deondre Francois. And Deondre Francois held himself well in a national TV appearance. Again, seemed very much more comfortable. The guy that I saw at ACC kickoff and a lot of the other folks just ACC, local-wise, national-wise saw, handled himself very, very well, answered questions really, really well, and started right out of the gate by admitting something that I think is really, really good that the quarterback of the Florida State Seminoles would admit about last year.
It was just a little bumpy because at the beginning of the season, we went through a lot of, bumps in the road, and to become the team that we wanted to become, we had to, get over those bumps and overcome the adversity that we went through. And I feel like towards the end of the season, we started to click on all cylinders and become the team we knew we could be.
The fact that FSU is a team and its leader, its mouthpiece, the guy who is the face of your program right now, your star quarterback, is able to come out and say this as a redshirt sophomore, I think is a really big deal. We talked a lot last season. One of the big themes that I like to stick on this show, last year, especially as time went on, was it kind of seemed like it was a culture reset for Florida State. It was the idea that, playing teams close in the first half that we are infinitely better than, only to fix it in the second half wasn't going to cut it anymore. We had to beat teams from start to finish, and you started to see that a little bit more as the season progressed and as it went on. Florida State grew as a team. It wasn't we're going to get by on talent alone. Of course, we've talked about it ad nauseum on this show, the loafing of the defense, sometimes the offensive line coming up short. And don't get me wrong, some of those questions still exist this year. But the idea that your guy, your quarterback, went up and he said, hey, we had some rocky problems at the beginning of that year. We're well aware of what happened there. Definitive leaders can help reset cultures. Definitive leaders can help change your program and the heartbeat of it. Florida State hasn't had one of those under center since 2014, and that's no shot at Sean McGuire, but we all know that Sean McGuire was just going to be the setup for the next guy. And we all knew that Everett Golson, in the games that he started, was just a stopgap solution to a problem that you need another, to steal a term from the NFL, franchise quarterback. You needed that guy, and now you've got him in his second year, and you have some consistency. And speaking of which, Deondre Francois got to talk a little bit about that, where he feels like he is from year one to year two, seeing as, once again, since 2014, this is the first time that you've gotten a quarterback who gets to start game one for the second straight year.
Yeah, I learned a lot last year. I'm a lot more experienced this year, so that should help a lot. Our O-line is more experienced, and just as an offense as a whole, we're more experienced, and we know more than we knew last year. And I know when to get the ball out, quicker. I know a lot of different things that I can do to avoid getting hit, and I'm gonna try to apply that to my game this season.
Now, at face value, there was something when I watched that live that kind of made me raise an eyebrow, going, "Really?" And that's that we're a more experienced offense. And at first glance, you think to yourself, how can you be? You lost Dalvin Cook, you lost Rod Johnson, you lost Kermit Whitfield, Bobo Wilson, and Travis Rudolph. So basically half your receiver core is gone. How can you say that you're a more experienced team? And I still don't completely agree with him. But when I thought about it more, I started to understand the point that he was making. Think about the talent that we've talked about that's going to be surrounding Deondre Francois. Think about your new starting running back in Jacques Patrick, who, as Ira Schafel, I think, has kind of correctly pointed out, and I thought about it more after we had him on the show yesterday, Florida State, especially early on, just because of how tough this schedule is right out of the gate, is going to lean on experience. If a couple of the freshmen, if somebody jumps out and is a wow factor, of course you got to play him, and of course you got to put in that game. But Jimbo Fisher wants to go with known, proven commodities. Jacques Patrick, one of those guys. Running back, junior. Auden Tate, guy who got to play a little bit more as the season went on last year because of the injuries and because of the things that surrounded, became a more experienced junior. Nyquan Murray, Nooney, he's a junior. All of those guys got valuable playing time as the year went on, and an important part of that is all of them got chemistry with their new quarterback. This isn't Frenchie playing with a bunch of freshmen. This isn't him having to, rush guys along. This isn't him saying, all right, here's how we practice at Florida State. Here's how we do things. That's going to happen with Cam Akers. That's going to happen with a couple of those younger guys on offense that are going to have to be sped along. But for the most part, this is now their era. This isn't the Dalvin Cook era anymore. This isn't the Sean McGuire era anymore. This isn't a bunch of holdovers from those teams in 13 and 14 that won a bunch of games, won a national title, had the 29 game. But this is a new era at Florida State, and I think that has to help Deondre Francois tremendously. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. What that had to be like for Deondre Francois when he has to take over a program and he has to become the leader while there's a veteran already on that team who was already the starter. Having to replace that guy cannot be easy. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. But even the offensive line, as many questions as there is about it, there's not going to be a true freshman on that line more than likely. It's going to be a lot of guys who at least have 1 year in this system, at least have 1 year in this program. So while I can't completely agree that this is a more experienced offense, because honestly, we don't know how this offense is going to look without Dalvin Cook under center. And I think that's a more than valid and a more than fair question. I get where he's coming from. I get where he says we all kind of feel a little bit more comfortable with each other because it's now their team. It's now the Deondre Francois era. This is this class of guys. It's a redshirt sophomore and a junior, all going to battle together. Guys who came in together, guys who grew together, guys who have a bond. I think that's important. Scott Van Pelt asked where Deondre Francois needs to get better, and he was decently candid about it. It took him a second to get there. He kind of gave a little bit of a stock answer, and then he was able to move on that.
What do you need to do to be the guy that gives Florida State a chance to win all these games?
That's a tough question. I feel like I'm a perfectionist, and I want to get better and perfect every part of my game. I feel like I've emerged as a leader this season. I feel like I've earned that respect, and now that I feel that way, I can lead not only by example but vocally, and I feel like I've gotten better at that, and just anticipating throws, being more accurate, better decision making, and those are just things that fall into playing the quarterback position that I want to perfect.
So, he kind of said he wants to get better in everything, and then he eventually got around to that thing. Anticipation, decision-making. I think we could all agree one of the things that Deondre Francois needs to do a little bit better, he needs to throw a better short ball. I mean, these are all things that mechanically you got to work on. Jimbo Fisher's well aware of it. Deondre Francois is well aware of it. Decision-making, guy had 7 interceptions last year. Not the worst number, especially when you put that up next to 20 touchdowns. And that's also an answer to protect his offensive line from last year. Getting the ball out of your hands quicker. Well, sometimes when you're only there for about a half a second before you get pulverized, it's pretty hard to get the ball out of your hands quicker than that. So he kind of had to protect himself. He had to protect his team a little bit in that answer. But again, it's what a leader does. And I think in and of itself, and I get it. These guys are trained. They're ready to go with stuff like that. I'm well aware. But the fact that he gave somewhat of a diplomatic answer there, I think is a really good thing. Finally, he got asked about growing into that leader role, and he's talked about gaining the respect of that locker room, and I think it comes into play with something we said a little bit earlier, in that he's a guy on that roster who had to replace a quarterback that was still on the roster and was still loved, especially by a bunch of the highly touted upperclassmen on that team. I thought Deondre Francois gave a really good answer here.
I feel like I grew into that role just by, playing with my heart, like we were talking before. The guys see me playing with my heart, practicing hard every day, giving them my all in practice, and holding everybody else around me accountable. I feel like, just by holding everybody accountable, that makes them come up and play to my par. So I feel like that's what we're harping on this season.
Holding guys accountable. It's a lot easier to hold your peers accountable than it is to hold guys who are 2-3 years older than you. He gets to be the guy now. We already touched on that. The Deondre Francois era is here. This has to be this offense. This has to be his offense. It has to be his team. Leaving it on the field. I think playing with heart, we all know exactly what he meant. He got thudded again and again and again and again. It's the underlying theme of a lot of these things. Bumps. That's the first thing he was asked about. Yeah, he took a lot of bumps. His butt was on the ground a lot. Experience. That comes with getting knocked down a lot. Gaining respect. That comes with getting pulverized again and again and again and getting back up. Leaving it on the field. Showing how much it means. I mean, just the little celebrations when he gets into the end zone against Florida and Michigan. That wasn't there at the beginning of the year. You saw a guy who, as the season went on and as it became more and more his team, you could tell it meant more and more to that squad. The fact that they were able to salvage things, the fact that they were able to get things done, despite what had happened early on in that season, is a big deal. Deondre Francois really had to earn this the hard way, and that's why, I really respect what he did last year, because nothing came easy. Wide receiver shakeups, injuries, and even then, the upperclassmen that he inherited were not guys that, your eyes popped out of your skull. You didn't say, wow, look at him go. Wow, look at Bobo. Wow, look at Kermit. Wow, look at Travis. And that's no shot on those guys. They were all serviceable, and they all did what they were supposed to do. But without the real emergence of a truly elite wide receiver in the upperclassmen, having to play second fiddle to the running back, which, again, I don't think he really minded much, considering Dalvin Cook won Florida State a lot of games last year. But you add you add the wide receiver thing with the offensive line, he had to deal with a lot of stuff. The early season losses that weren't always on that offense, and as a matter of fact, usually weren't on that offense. It was the missed field goals against North Carolina. It was the loafing in different places against Louisville. It was some of the fumbles that weren't his fault. So many things happened wrong for a redshirt freshman quarterback last year, and he came out of it, and according to some, is one of the top 15 players in the country. I think he's handled himself really, really well. Time's going to tell if he's going to be the guy for the Florida State Seminoles, but so far he's saying all the right things, and every time we're out on the practice field, he seems to be doing the right things. So I'm excited. I hope you are too. We got more after this. It's Wake Up War Chant, brought to you by our friends at For the Table on 97.9 ESPN Radio. You know, I mentioned earlier on in the show that Dalvin Cook has been getting some rave reviews in Minnesota, and we had this debate with the NFL draft approaching of the 3 running backs that you wanted, and of course, a lot of Florida State fans, and I think most could admit, selfishly wanted him either in Jacksonville or Tampa Bay. Jacksonville ends up with a running back in those top couple rounds, and that's Leonard Fournette. But there was the big debate nationally amongst Cook, Fournette, and McCaffrey. All early signs are that all 3 of them are doing very, very well. Fournette, a lot of talk about him and how much Jacksonville wants to run the ball, that he's looked decently sharp in camp. But by the way, I did not know this. Did you know Jacksonville was in the top 10 last year of yards before contact rushing and was one of the 5 worst, or I think 5 or 6 or 7 worst teams in the league in yards after contact? So in other words, when you got hit, you fell down. You look at that, you look at what Christian McCaffrey's been doing in Carolina. I don't know if you've seen the video of him just he takes Luke Kuechly out of his cleats, man. Like, you know, when you played football in the backyard and somebody did a move on the kid or on the playground, somebody juked a kid, and you just didn't look at that kid the same way for 24, 48 hours. Imagine that happening to one of the best linebackers in the league. That's what Christian McCaffrey did. Dalvin Cook, there's indications that he's going to be the number 1 guy in Minnesota. I think it's cool to see. I would love to see a class of just one position where all 3 of those dudes, who by all indication, all 3 seem to be good guys, stand-up guys, they've all said the right things. Dalvin maybe didn't impress in his interviews, but I think most around here know Dalvin was pretty charitable with his time. He was pretty charitable with his efforts. They all seem like 3 good guys. If all 3 of them were to be successful, I think I wouldn't have any problem with that. Because there always seems to be that guy in the draft, right? There's always the one quarterback that didn't turn out, or there's the one wide receiver in that group that just didn't. Just once, I'd love to have the story of, hey, everybody worked out. Everybody was good. There wasn't a Ryan Leaf in the bunch. There wasn't a Todd Marinovich in the bunch. Everybody did what they were supposed to. Everybody went out, took care of business. We're going to take care of some more business for you today. FSU practice rolls on, our second open period to the media. So make sure you're sticking with warchant.com for all of that coverage. And make sure you're sticking with us, period, in general. We've got a couple great guests coming up on Wake Up War Chant over the next couple days. So stay tuned to us. Stay tuned to warchant.com. Make sure you're in the loop with the ultimate source in Seminole sports. That being said, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Mike and Mike's up next here on 97.9 ESPN Radio. Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.